Okay, looks like we're live. Okay. Let's see. We have all these technical difficulties today. Um, no, just can you hear me? Hello? Hmm.
Hey, Brad.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm back on.
can you see me?
I can't see you, but Can everybody see you?
Oh, I don't think so. I think everyone can hear me though.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, the first time I did it, I couldn't see anybody, and I just did it. I had some sort of like conflict on my computer with this work program, and I didn't know how to figure that out, so I couldn't see anybody, but it worked.
okay, I'll come back. I'll do it again.
Okay.
Okay. Huh, I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, same here.
Okay.
Yep, there we go.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Can everyone see it?
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, yay, yay. Great.
Yeah. I got a compliment about my beard from Javier.
It is a very nice beard.
Yeah. Well, I do keep it for the boys, so it's a selfless thing that I'm doing.
Totally.
All right, so we moved through that.
Yes.
But the rest of the links, they're going to be on the website um, as well. So, and you're going to get another email as well too. So don't worry, we're working through things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so sweet. Um, Today we were going to start with questions um, from some. If you have questions, we'll start with those. So any questions that you have from the past practices. Um, and then we'll work through those in this session, do a little bit of practice, and then, of course, tomorrow evening we have another long session where it's just going to be mostly practice and putting these techniques into play. Justin, are you frozen?
I can hear you. I can't
Okay.
see anything, but I'm all right. Can
Okay.
you see me?
Yeah. Well, we
Wait.
can see you, frozen, yeah, but we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'll just roll.
Awesome. Okay. Great. So any questions we can start with? In the meantime, I'm putting a link in text box there. And that's a article on how to practice shamatha, or calm abiding meditation. And so that's something that I wrote, and we're going to be working with that definitely tomorrow evening in the session. Yeah. So as we wait for Justin to get back, when I was coming into practice, I started with Dzogchen, actually. I started with practicing Dzogchen and Trekchö and like all the pieces of Dzogchen. And Dzogchen, I know some of you may have been trained in Dzogchen. And in Dzogchen, there's this philosophy around the practice is that you start with um, the insight, or you start with the view, um, or you start with the fruit, right? And then you get insight into the nature of the mind, and then you get dropped into learning how to work and train and stabilizing and reconnecting with the nature of the mind. And so I started with that, and it was really quite difficult. Actually, it was really actually quite challenging because I had no idea what the nature of mind was. And of course, in tantric traditions, you get really obsessed with pointing out instructions. And then there's this like belief that every lama, every teacher knows how to give pointing out instructions, and really that's not the case. And so when like I had these experiences of my mind being pointed out, I just actually didn't know what it was. I had no idea what my mind was. So I always felt confused when I was practicing Dzogchen. I was, doing Dzogchen for a good year, for the first good year of my practice. And then when I started working with my root teacher, first, Lama Willa Miller, I connected to her, and then I connected to Nyola Rinpoche through Willa Miller, Lama Willa. I got connected to the Kagyu school, and then and of course being introduced to Mahamudra. And in Mahamudra, the philosophy is we start with the ground. So Nyola Rinpoche would always talk about how if we were building, so he would always say that Mahamudra was like building a house, and we have to start with the basement. We have to start, well, even with the foundation. We have to pour the foundation, we have to build the basement, you build the walls, and you build up each level consecutively after you have a strong foundation. So Mahamudra was about foundation. It was about pouring the concrete for something foundational. So you didn't start with the nature of the mind, essentially. In Mahamudra, you started with just doing this really basic labor of coming into relationship with the material of your mind. And for me, that was a much better fit for me, because I could work step by step and building up into noticing really what my mind was, um, and that foundation is something that if we take the care and if we take, the step-by-step procedures and building that foundation, then that's a foundation that will be really unshakable. It will be quite solid. Um, Working with a strong foundation is really the difference between, for me, building a house on sand or building a house on rock, right, or on stone or something like that. And it's just been my experience that so many practitioners um, really aren't, they don't really have a strong foundation in the practice. Mahamudra, this is really not a strong foundation. If there's no strong foundation, there's really no insight that can come from the practice. It will just be something that will breed a kind of frustration and a kind of mundaneness, I think. And then you lose interest, you lose inspiration in the practice. Um, and I know, this isn't, me talking shit about anyone, but it's stating a really, observable fact that, there are teachers, I would say specifically lamas who actually don't know how to meditate. They actually don't have really strong experiences of the nature of the mind, right? They look really good, actually, teaching meditation. Um, and I think they talk a good game about the practice, but the realization and the experience really isn't there at all. Um, so Lama Justin won't be joining us after all, which is fine. We'll just continue um, moving into this. Um, so, and what I really appreciated about the training, that I received under Norla Rinpoche, particularly my training in retreat, in retreat you just start with you start from you start as if you know nothing about the mind or meditation, right? And so yeah, you go into retreat, and many of us, if you go into through your retreat, you've got some practice under your belt, right? But when you start the Mahamudra training, right, you start as if you know nothing at all. Like you start as if you have not been practicing for years. And that was so incredibly beneficial for me to start from the ground level, right? Of just, starting with the traditional ways that we've set up Mahamudra practice traditionally, with going for refuge, with generating devotion for the teachers and the gurus, with using that energy of devotion is, we would say the devotion is like the foot, of meditation. It gives you mobility. The devotion gives you mobility. It gives you a fluidity to move into. It helps us to understand the fluidity of the mind when we're grounded in devotion, right? It's in my practice, I think of it, as the lubrication. Like it's a good like squeezing of lube into everything to get everything nice and going in the practice. It opens the door into understanding what the mind is, and essentially that is where we're starting with shamatha. Shamatha is the work of understanding what. Um, well, it's the work of understanding and getting experience of how mind is. Okay, like how the mind works, what's in the mind, what is a thought, what is an emotion, um, and the training that we received was, really very much straightforward. But as I deepened in the practice, and of course, finishing retreat, getting out in the world and training, and then getting involved in other types of meditation teaching, I realized that the training around shamatha within the Mahamudra system can be actually a little more inclusive. It can be a little more detailed. Um, we were taught, you bring your attention to a thought, right? And you just you hold the thought um, within this attention, within this awareness, actually, within this awareness. Um, but there is an energy that we're also relying on within that basic awareness practice. And the energy is the energy of concentration and mindfulness. you know, um, in traditional Theravada or insight practice, the progression within the meditation system is starting with concentration practice, moving into mindfulness, and then mindfulness into shamatha or calm abiding. But we always understand that concentration is the energy that's driving these different levels of attention and awareness. And so when we get into shamatha, we're actually, of course, um, depending on the tradition, shamatha and mindfulness are used interchangeably. In Tantric Vajrayana traditions, we want to get really specific about shamatha being, calm abiding. But, in my experience, um, shamatha is an expression of mindfulness, but it's an expression of mindfulness that has a little more space. It's not so focused and razor sharp, but we can relax a little more in shamatha, and shamatha or calm abiding. Um, and then that calm abiding, or shamatha, can relax even more into awareness, and within awareness that we start getting into understanding the nature of mind as well. So I'm going to stop there for a second just to make sure um, there aren't questions or confusion. So Lotus Six Nails is a non-conceptual meditation. Machi Lajin taught the Cha. Oh, it just disappeared. Okay. How can someone be a teacher but not have a strong foundation? Oh, it's really easy. Um, you can be really attractive. You can have a really excellent marketing and branding strategy. You can pay people to give you a title like Rinpoche. You can have a lot of charisma. And so charisma can be really confused as realization as well. I have met teachers who are quite charismatic. They're quite magnetizing, and we can confuse magnetizing as realization, when in fact is attraction. It's pleasure. It's something is an attraction that's built upon pleasure. So we're drawing closer to someone, but it doesn't mean that that person has special insight or realization. One's realization is evidenced through conduct, right? And so I don't care how you look or how sexy you are, or how charismatic you are. I'm interested in your conduct. I'm interested in how you're living the view of your realization. You know, how do you relate to people? How are you holding your emotions, right? How are you practicing wisdom and clarity and just mundane interactions, in your life? I love to sit and just watch my teachers do mundane things like walking across a room or walking down the sidewalk or having a conversation with someone. Or, I love to sit and watch my teachers take a sip of water or tea. I love to glance at my teacher sitting alone, because that's where the conduct is arising, you know, how they're moving through space, how they're interacting with folks. Do I experience their spaciousness? Do I experience their clarity? Do I experience their compassion? All of this, particularly in this conversation, is an expression of Mahamudra, of the view. Like, Mahamudra is an embodied experience that is expressed through how we're moving through space and time and reality. You know, we can sense when the teacher is intimately connected to movement and to their thoughts and to their speech. Um, that's what we're looking for, you know. And there are teachers who, like, they're not, they're realized, but they're not great teachers. But that realization and the conduct actually becomes the way in which they offer transmission around the foundations and the principles of the practice. So we have to develop, I guess, not a critique, maybe critique is not the word, but we have to develop um, we have to develop a sensitivity. We have to develop a certain gaze when we're coming into relationship with someone we're trying to determine if they're going to be our teacher or not, right? Um, don't get distracted by the branding and the marketing, you know. Um, don't get distracted by that. I can go on to social media. I can go onto Instagram and, like, pull up countless profiles of teachers, meditation teachers, yoga teachers, spiritual teachers who have beautiful, excellent, wonderful, meticulous social media presentations and media, presentations and so forth and so on. That doesn't actually tell me anything about their realization, about their insight and practice, But maybe they put a video of their teaching out. And so I'm able to look at that and I'm able to, okay, to get a sense of, like, okay, maybe they know what they're talking about, but I can't get any further than that until I come into a deeper relationship with that person, right? Maybe I have to sit an online retreat with them, or, maybe I have to go, and go to a private personal teaching, or maybe I get one-on-one with that person. That's where I begin to really explore the depth of that realization. Mahamudra isn't just this cold thing. This is kind of out in the world. It's not, Mahamudra isn't something that we're trying to colonize. We're not trying to, like, possess. We're not trying to brand. We're trying to live the view of Mahamudra. We're trying to live the spaciousness. We're trying to live into the nature of everything. Because as we live into the nature of everything, then we begin to experience freedom and liberation. And that freedom and liberation means that, among many things, that we begin to be less violent. We begin to experience less confusion. We begin to experience deeper intimacy. We begin to become more ourselves, right? So embodying Mahamudra doesn't mean that I become someone else. It means that I become myself, right? And it doesn't mean that I become meek and mild and quiet, or it doesn't mean that I become a renunciate. It doesn't mean that I become a monk or live in the monastery. It means that I am moving through the world as myself, right? And so if you look at the lineage of teachers, you start with, like, Tilopa, right? Tilopa is Mahasiddha, who was living on the streets, who people would avoid, who people will look at and say, you're crazy. Like, you just sit around and, like, pound sesame seeds, right? Like what are you? Like you're the lowest, like laborer, and but this is the person who has such tremendous insight, and it takes someone like Naropa, for instance, who became one of his principal students. It takes someone like Naropa was also very accomplished, right? He was the head of a monastic institution. But Naropa also had a deeper thirst and a deeper desire to embody the view of Mahamudra, which led him to one of the most realized teachers, perhaps of that time, of that day. It takes our thirst, it takes our deep thirst and desire to get something authentic and real, not something that's like, that kind of looks good, but something real and authentic, right? So here's another example. Um, like you know, I have had meals that, I may go to a restaurant and I may order something and it may look beautiful on the plate. Like it was immaculate. I've had meals that have been delivered to me and served. I've just looked at it and gone, oh my God, like this is the most beautiful plate of food I've ever encountered in my whole life. And then I take a taste of it, I take a bite of it, and I go, oh my God, this tastes like shit. you know and this is the same with approaching teachers. They can look really good, but then you get a taste of their dharma and you're like, what the fuck is this? What's this like bland, like normal, unlike seasoned, watered down thing that you're serving, you know but then on the other hand, I have gone places, and this is part of my upbringing in the South, where you go to what we call a hole in the wall restaurant. So a hole in the wall is a restaurant you just look at, you're like, oh my God, how is this place open? And then you go in, and things don't improve when you go in. You're like, oh my God, what's happening? And then you get something, you get this plate of food, and it looks all right. It's not beautiful, but it looks all right, right? And then you taste it and you're like, and it's like the most amazing food that you've ever had in your life, you know? And that's what we're talking about right now, particularly in this time. We're talking about um, how do you move past the aesthetics of beauty and desire, and charisma, to tune into direct realization, to tune into these pure teachings, right? You know, going back to like the founders of the Kagyu school, then you have Milarepa. I'm not Milarepa, Marpa, who was a student of Naropa. And Marpa, quite honestly, Marpa, we would consider Marpa like this middle-aged, you know, kind of guy who like loves his beer. He's like really interested in the land, and working, and kind of rough, kind of like trashy, in a way, like just kind of gruff, and working class. We would say is something like working class, and but one of the most brilliant translators of texts, right? Brilliant, Sanskrit and Tibetan translators, and one of the most realized minds, who, of course, trained Milarepa. Of course, these are all stories. These are mythologies, as well. Um, we can argue that these folks actually existed. We can also argue that they didn't exist. But the point is, that there is a theme within the lineage that we're coming out of, without the Kagyu lineage, the Mahamudra lineage, where we're not interested in aesthetics, we're not interested in beauty, we're not interested in charisma, we're interested in realization, and our desire for authentic realization will link up with the expression of actual realization in the form of a teacher. Um, yeah, conduct is important, right? You know, it doesn't matter how eccentric and weird and out there someone is. That's not, for me, that's not about conduct. Conduct is about ethics, right? When I talk about conduct, I'm actually saying, are you reducing violence, right? Do you have a sense of what is conducive to enlightenment? Do you have a sense of what to give up and abandon? And do you have a sense of what to bring on in order to create the causes and conditions for, for realization, right? You know, that's what I'm concerned with, ethics and conduct. That comes directly out of the practice. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out what our minds are and the nature of our minds and how the mind is, because we're trying to reduce violence. We're trying to get into the nature of the sense of self, and we're trying to break through that, you know. And the results of that will be conduct. It will be ethics. It will be morality. And real ethical conduct, real moral conduct, not this kind of Puritan, kind of Abrahamic Western religion conduct. I'm talking about the essence of right conduct, and that right conduct means I am always in a discernment to understand what is conducive for my enlightenment, what is conducive for my enlightenment. Maybe what is conducive for my enlightenment is not conducive for your enlightenment, and we have to have a higher level of ethical evaluation that helps us to meet people where they are in their specific situations, right? Not to take this broad kind of stroke of like what ethical conduct is and to hold people to the same standard, right? I like to have drinks. I like cocktails. I like beers. Not so much beers, but I like a good fruity, colorful cocktail with like rum and vodka too. Which actually reminds me, it's almost cocktail time in my world. But I can do that. I can have a couple of cocktails, a day if I want. That does nothing to impact my level of realization and insight. It doesn't impact my ethical conduct, but it's something that I enjoy, and it's something that I can skillfully use to create relationships with other people, to be social, and quite honestly, it takes the edge off sometimes, like on occasion I smoke weed, right? I can do that, I don't have a problem with attachment to any substance, right? Uh, and I don't use it to get, as a substitute for practice. I'm not using it to avoid anything. I use it as just part of a way to enhance, maybe like, I don't know, I use it sometimes as a skillful tool to work with an edge around an emotion or whatever it may be, Um, but with other folks, they have to have some structure around how they're relating to substances, right? Because of past, abuse and attachment, fixation, or being in recovery and so forth. So that's what we mean. It's like some people have to renounce, some people can be in a relationship with, and it's fine as well. Let's see. Can I say more about devotion? Um, this is okay. Can I say more about devotion and practice? Devotion to what? And there's the next question here from Lorena too. Is the same question, similar question. Can you talk more about devotion as a prerequisite for the path? I understand the need for teachers and gurus. I find the concept of devotion tricky because people are fallible. And I believe it's important to be able to question figures and authority. I can understand devotion to the practice or the Buddha, and also dedication and looking up to the teachers, but devotion feels like a heavy word for me. Thanks. Yeah. So my, so my root teacher, Nola Rinpoche, which, many of you may not be familiar with this, but the world will be familiar with this because I have a chapter in Love and Rage about this same thing that I'm about to start talking about. But for many years, my root teacher, Lama Nola Rinpoche, was having inappropriate sexual relationships with students, several actually of my friends and colleagues. And so this came out, about 4 or 5 years ago. I would say about 4 years ago now. And it was, quite intense. I knew about what was happening maybe a year or two before our general monastery community found out about it, because I was told by a close friend who had been in a relationship with him. And for me, that was a really tough period, because I loved my teacher and I had a lot of devotion to my teacher, but I was really upset and pissed off about his conduct, because I believe that he used his position of authority to have these sexual relationships with women. And not only that, I believe he used his kind of authority just to do things that created other kinds of harm, And I can say that, I can say that and also still really love him and really appreciate the fact that I wouldn't be here without him. There would be no Lama Rod without Lama Nola Rinpoche and the impact of his teachings in my life and in my practice. What I do not have devotion to his conduct in terms of how, he was in relationships with students. I don't have devotion to the ways in which he created discord amongst the Sangha. I don't have devotion in that. I have devotion in his realization. I have devotion in the wakefulness of his mind. I have devotion to his Buddha nature, right? I have devotion to the expressions of wisdom that I tuned in directly to, right? That's what I have devotion to. So we're not talking about necessarily having devotion to a person. And we're having devotion to the ways in which the teacher is able to reflect my own wisdom back to me. That's when I'm having devotion. That's when I'm giving rise to devotion in, right? When I say I have devotion to his mind, what I'm actually saying is I have devotion to the ways in which his mind reflected my mind back to me. The ways in which he taught me how to recognize and to embrace and to embody the expression of wisdom in my own nature and in my own mind. That's what I have devotion for. That's what I have the love for, right? That's what I have the gratitude around. So devotion is tricky, but it's tricky because the one person that we refuse to have devotion in is our own innate capacity to experience realization. That's actually what we're struggling with in devotion. Many of us refuse to accept the fact that we can actually get free, because we're so self-identified with the bullshit, um, and we can say, yeah, the teacher is bullshit, the teacher is, whatever, but we can't say that what we potentially have been introduced to about the nature of our own minds, we can't throw that away. Because that's how we're trying to get free. We have to use that realization to get free. And we have to say, okay, this teacher was excellent on this one hand, not so excellent on the other, and you have to hold the complexity of that. If you can't get complex, you can't do this. The deeper you get into this, the more complex and contradictory all this starts to become. And the perfect example of that is to study the Heart Sutra. It doesn't get more complex than the Heart Sutra, where you have to actually believe and practice with this thing where form is emptiness and emptiness is form and emptiness is no other than form and form is no other than emptiness. Like, that's fucking insane, you know? You can't, yeah, and so you can't help but to question a relation to someone. There are different expressions of one's realization. Um, there are different streams of one's consciousness as well. One thing that you can explore that through is by, or if you ever had this experience of going to a teaching. I have often had this experience. I go to a teaching, the room can be full of people. And then after the teaching, I can just be hanging out with people talking about the teaching. And, I've had this experience where, like, yeah, the teacher said this, this, and that. And someone will look at me and say, no, they didn't. They didn't say anything about that. And then you get into an argument. Where you're like, no, they were definitely talking about this, and someone says, no, they weren't actually talking about that. I paid attention, I know. So that is an expression of the ways in which realized teachers can actually split their consciousness, and begin to meet different people at the same time in the same place, exactly where they are. And this is what we're talking about. We talk about the trickiness of Tantra. Tantra gets into the grayness of everything. And it's not a judgment to say that, to struggle, because of course I struggle, right? And I've been there and I've done that. Of course I've struggled with that, but I've had to get I've had to get into the nature of things, to be with things, right? That good and bad are often happening at the very same time. Um, I don't consider myself a good person. I don't consider myself a virtuous person. I let that go because those are traps for me. Those labels are just traps, Instead, I consider myself someone who is striving to practice goodness and virtue in each moment, because it actually gives me the space to look at the ways in which I am not practicing goodness or virtue, in my life. Um, and there's always going to be a shadow for everyone. And I have criticisms of all my teachers, right? My white teachers, I'm like, well, they're white supremacists, blah blah blah. They haven't done enough work around, their whiteness, blah blah blah. Then my Tibetan teachers, is always a criticism of, they haven't done enough work around patriarchy, and hierarchy and power. I can, I can bring a criticism and a sense of distrust to any relationship, particularly all my relationships with teachers. I've had to step back and to say, you know what, they're complex, and the thing that I'm avoiding in this thing that I'm going through with teachers is that I'm avoiding my own complexity, right? And because I avoid my own complexity, I'm expecting my teachers to embody a perfection, because I actually need to get really distracted from my lack of, what we would call imperfection, or the ways in which I struggle to be with my own complexity. You know, I need examples in the world that are really simple and black and white, so I can just like worship that, and I can be taken completely outside of my experience. So I don't have to deal with the complexity, the imperfection, and the grayness of whatever this is right here. You know, um, you know, these great teachers like the Dalai Lama, to the world, the Dalai Lama is like the father, right? In the tradition, he's a patriarch. you know, um, does that make the Dalai Lama less of a realized teacher? No, but it does make him really complex, you know, and it takes work to be with complexity. Um, yeah, I think for those of us who are coming from complex intersectional identities, this teaching around complexity, it makes sense because those of us in this intersectional place around race and sexuality and class and ability and age and all of that coming together, like we have to, like I've had to navigate complexity my whole life, you know, being within an intersectionality that's actually weighed more on marginalization and oppression. I have had to understand complexity quite often, right? I've had to be in relationships with white people who I have both experienced violence from, but also white people who I've had to be with because they've been my teachers in school. They've been, people that I've had to get resources from. So I've had to hold these complex relationships because I've needed something, you know. Yeah, it does mean that like, yeah, and people also have to be held accountable as well. Yeah, you can hold people accountable. Absolutely. That's what we did in my monastery. We held our teacher accountable, you know. You know. So this clarification of teaching ethics and complexity is really reaching and soothing fears and anger and shame deeply seated in me. Um, this is all, this is all um, Mahamudra. You get into the nature of mind, you're getting into a complexity here. Holding paradox within self and others. Exactly. It's the contradictions. And you have to, you can have it's important that you have boundaries. You can say, I absolutely can't deal with this. So therefore I can't be in a relationship with this person if they do this. Absolutely. We have to have that, right? But we also have to have the ability to hold space for all the contradictions and the paradoxes and everything that's always happening. That is how we mature in the path, is when we actually learn how to be with the complexity, and we're able to say, okay, this isn't conducive for my realization, for my practice, right? So I don't need to be here. I love my monastery. I trained at my monastery. I think my monastery is incredible, but I think my monastery is really violent right now because though we've held our teacher accountable, they have chosen not to do the work of examining power and hierarchy and marginalization, and they haven't asked these larger questions, around, class and privilege as well, that has maintained systems of inequity within the monastic community there, and so therefore I choose not to be there, but I still understand that place as being, really important for my practice and such an important part of my development as a teacher. And I can hold both of those complexities at the same time. And I have to mourn all the ways in which it doesn't make sense. I have to mourn all the ways in which my teacher didn't live up to this ideal ethical conduct. You know, um, I have to mourn it. I have to touch into the sadness and the grief and the shame. I have to hold space for it. right? And then I then have to take a step back and say, okay, these are the things that I won't do, right? My teacher created harm in these certain ways. I don't want to do the same thing. And so, therefore, I want to put together a structure that actually helps me to be held accountable. This is why I have an ethics statement. This is why, like, I have supervising teachers. This is why, being a part of community is important, because these are the ways in which I get feedback and are held accountable as well. It takes this one question: being in relationship with teachers who have created misconduct or created harm and violence is really one of the most challenging questions that we can work with in our practice. And it doesn't you just don't end up somewhere overnight with this. It's taking me years. Here, I will actually prove it. I have a copy of the book here. I'll just show you this chapter. Um, So I'll just put it up to the screen. I'm sorry, I had to use a different camera, so that my camera that I'm using like sucks. But so as you see right here on the screen, so you may not be able to see this, probably backwards, but it's called Me Too and the Guru. So and that's it. And you have to go through that. You have to go through, you know, um, the sadness and despair and the rage and the anger, and also you can go onto YouTube or my website, whichever. I mean, I had to give a talk at Naropa University, I guess 3 years ago now. No, 2 years ago, in the midst of all of this, and where I was just like really pissed off. And I was like, I'm just really pissed off at my teacher. I'm really pissed off at everyone. It was a teaching on love and rage, right? Um, and it was just really messy, but that's what you have to go through to come into a place where you're able to hold space for the complexity. You know, um, it's never going to be all good. It's never going to be perfect. Um, there are many things about me that people don't like. You know, but what I do work really hard at is not creating causes and conditions that would lead me into ethical misconduct within sanghas and with students. You know, um, so that crazy wisdom, yeah, is Shambhala. Has done a lot of harm. At the same time, has trained so many great students, accomplished teachers like Prema Chögyam, who eventually found out also didn't believe the student Prostriyat. Yeah, and teachers fuck up too. Teachers fuck up. I mean, I would say there are teachers who fuck up a lot, actually. And sometimes teachers fuck up. Teachers say the wrong thing. Teachers make the wrong decisions. Teachers, like, their emotions, their feelings, their attachments get a little strong, and then there are decisions that are made. But I get that, you know. I get how that happens because we're human. Like, because you're a realized teacher doesn't mean you're not still human at the same time, right? And so you have these experiences, and so you may make the wrong decision. But what I'm really interested is in reconciliation and restorative justice and those kinds of things. Like, how can we reconcile? How can we understand the harm that's been done? How can we build trust again? And we talk about all the stuff that's happening with teacher misconduct and so forth. I there are I mean, there may be one or two cases, but really I have yet to hear about a teacher who has been accused of ethical misconduct and has been proven that they've engaged in ethical misconduct. I've yet to see a teacher who has really gone through the process of reconciliation and restorative kind of justice in terms of coming back into trust and balance with teachers, with their communities. Um, And that's when I'm interested. Yes, the mistake is horrible, but I'm also interested in what we do to reconcile and to heal harm. Um, and that's what builds trust for me, is if you've done something that creates harm, and if you apologize or you go through whatever it is, and one goes through to reconcile. That's really important for me. Um, so going back, devotion is important because the answer to that question is devotion helps us to build a relationship with our own innate potentiality to experience realization. And that devotion is mirrored back. That devotion becomes a way in which we're able to offer consent for the teacher to mirror back our own capacity to experience clarity and care. And that opens the door into realization as well. Um, and There was something else that someone. Oh, so yeah, perfection. So the more we're able to work with our own complexity, the more we're able to understand the complexity of others. You know, um, and Reverend Angel was my main teacher around complexity. And that's where I got that word from. She was just like stuff. Everything's complex. You know, and she would just show me examples of this complexity in her own practice, as well. And I would be like, oh, okay, you know, and you have a tenderness around complexity, but you also have boundaries. You also are able to hold people accountable, but there has to be a kind of a tenderness and openness, a softness around it, because you're having to have that tenderness and softness for yourself. Because if you don't have that tenderness and generosity and softness for yourself, you won't ever be able to move through the complexity into a place where you're able to hold complexity at the same time reducing the ways in which that complexity creates harm for yourself and for others. You can't get so tight and shut down and critical and judgmental and think that you're going to actually experience liberation from the suffering of complexity. You know, that's not going to be possible. I work with so many people; they're just so hard on themselves. It's so intense. It's like people just the shame, the self judgment, all that. It's a form of self violence, and you'll never get free from that until you hold yourself in a non judgmental kindness. And when you tell yourself it's okay, it's okay. And I want you to. This is the practice that we're gonna do right now in this moment, right? I want everyone to kind of look into their experience and look at the things that they just fucking struggle with, right? The things that you struggle with, the things that you're always running away from, the things that you're ashamed of, the things that whatever you're running away from. And I want you to look at it and I want you to say, okay, okay, there you are. And I wonder if you can just notice it, let it be there, accept it, and then just give it space by not reacting to it. And what's going to happen is you're going to start experiencing these things. You're going to have to experience the heartbreak and the shame and the embarrassment. It's okay. Right? It's okay that we're scared. It's okay that we're confused. It's okay, that we struggle with trauma. It's okay, that we don't know all the answers. It's okay that we don't trust ourselves and we don't trust other people. It's okay that you know you doubt yourself and you doubt others. It's okay. It's okay. Let it be there. like you won't ever be able to move through it unless you let it be there and allow yourself to experience what this thing is. And some of you are terrified of letting your heart break. You know, so you're just, so many people are afraid of letting that heart break, and we have this pressure and this crust and this contraction around the heart. We're trying to keep it together, and it's just nothing but suffering. It's trauma. And then even at that, we say, okay, there you are. Okay, this is the expression of Mahamudra here. Okay, so there are some questions about this after space and what does the space look like of accountability and so forth. Well, you know, maybe we can talk about this tomorrow in the community meeting if you come to that. But I would just briefly say that there's no reconciliation, there's no after space until the one who created harm is able to recognize that there is harm that's been created. If that's not going to happen, you know, then the thing that has to be done is like that person has to be it the teacher, be it whomever, that person has to be, um, I don't know, somehow put out of the community, you know. But until that happens, until there's a recognition of harm from the person who created harm, there's not going to be anything happening, you know. And there have been sanghas that have been split because teachers refuse to admit that there's harm being done, and that just creates a whole split. And the sangha can't heal. You know, communities can't heal until responsibility is taken. You know, have you ever gotten an apology from someone who didn't mean it? You know, you know, they just opened their mouth and said, "I apologize," but there was absolutely no kind of connection to the harm that's been done. You know, there's no healing there at all. You can't heal from that. Um, and of course, yeah, you can take that person out. You can the person who did harm. You can take them out of the community, and then what you're left with is the community themselves having to do this work of grieving together, grieving the harm. And we also have to do the work of forgiving ourselves, right? And this is a really nuanced thing, where I may be the victim of harm, of violence, right? But there's a subtle part of me that's blaming myself for being a victim, you know? And this is something that is echoed in Sangha abuse situations. I've done a lot of work around this too. I've, sat with a lot of Sanghas, I've sat with a lot of people working through this. But from my experience, I've studied this formally, academically, and I've done this casework with people in Sanghas. But what I've understood is that there is a way in which students blame themselves for the harm that the teacher has created because they weren't good students, they weren't realized enough, they didn't follow the teachings correctly, they didn't offer the teacher what they needed. Um, and I think you have to go through a process of forgiving yourself and actually realizing that you're not the one to blame, right? That within, the teacher holds a place of authority, and as those of us in the space who are in professions where we have to think about ethical, like professional ethics, particularly for therapists, mental health folks, doctors, folks like that, like you have to think about professional ethics, you have to think about power, you have to understand that like as a person in authority in a relationship, as the influencer in the relationship, then you have the primary responsibility to protect the relationship that you're in because of the power imbalance, you know. Um, and so as a teacher, you know, when there's harm in relationship between myself and a student, then I have to take a lot of responsibility for that as well. Thus, I have a lot of boundaries around how I interact and relate to students, which is part of ethical professional ethics as well. You Yeah, well, the primary responsibility is that, in professional ethics, the power imbalance states that, like, you know, um, people lose agency when they come into contact with someone. Um, you would like when you come into contact in a relationship with someone you have deemed to be an expert or someone you need something from, then the power has shifted. You've lost agency, and so therefore in that situation we understand that, like, yes, like, therefore that power, the agency shifts to the person, to the authority, to the expert in the relationship, and therefore the responsibility is on that person to hold the integrity of that relationship. You know, you know, like you have to, like Angela, exactly. You have to, as a teacher, you have to have these boundaries. We've been abused as teachers. I've experienced ethical misconduct from my academic teachers in graduate school as well. And it's been like, it's been rough. Because these people hold your future, so you want to challenge and call out this professor, but you're trying to get a recommendation from this professor to go to do something else, or you're trying to get a decent grade in this class, and it gets complex. That's why professional ethics is it's so complex like that, because we understand that, like, this person that may be abusing us, we also need something from them, you know. And it makes it really hard to challenge abuse because you have resources that you need to gather from this person. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You. So this is this is my thing, and this is a very controversial opinion within the world of Buddhism. But I'm used to having a controversial opinion. I believe I'm still in the process of proving this. That we can still maintain a sense of agency in relationships to our teachers and still get a lot of benefit and realization from the relationship. I can still be devoted to my teacher, but I can also maintain agency in the relationship. So I know what's happening and I feel safe in a way that helps me to continue trusting a relationship. I'm working on that. That's going to be, data that I'm collecting for a while, but that's my theory that I'm trying to work on. But people really like push back on that. They say it's impossible. Um, I have colleagues, friends, teacher friends who are just like, who don't, not that they don't want to deal with nuance and complexity. It's not that. I don't know. I think that I think sometimes you come into lineages and traditions and you're trained to be a teacher and you walk out of it thinking that you have a right to do everything that's described in the lineage. And I have an opposite opinion, which is that I do not believe that I have a right or the capability to do everything that's described in my lineage, even if it is described as my right to do so as an authorized teacher. I do not believe if I have authority to do something, I should do it, you know? And that's kind of where I draw the line, and that's kind of where I have to stay at, you know, because certain things may have been normal or done often doesn't mean that I have to do that as a teacher. Um, so, but tomorrow, so we have the community meeting tomorrow, and we have Mahamudra. So Mahamudra, we're going to actually practice Mahamudra tomorrow in the sit at 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We're going to actually do practice. It's going to be mostly practice. It's not going to be me talking and you all distracting me with these complex questions that I love to talk about. It's not going to be, and we're going to be sitting and practicing. And, it's going to be boot camp, Mahamudra boot camp. That's what we're going to be doing tomorrow. There's a place for talking, there's a place for practice and sitting and watching our minds. We're going to do that tomorrow. Okay, so I have to run. I have another thing to get to, and plus we're at time. So, um, so yeah, and so I just want to dedicate the merit of this time, this session, to the liberation of all beings. May we all experience, what it feels like to be in safe, balanced, equitable communities. May we all experience what it feels like to be in good, healthy, balanced relationships with spiritual teachers and so forth. And may we all actually find authentic teachers that can teach us to be free and woke and enlightened. May we find those teachers. May we find those people, and may we become also people who understand what's conducive for our own realization and enlightenment as well. So thank you all so much for being here. Please do some movement practice, some breath practice, and so forth to kind of work out all this energy that we've kind of dug up as well. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll see you. Hopefully, I'll see you tonight at the Amitabha practice as well. But if not, maybe I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, thank you.